Welcome to the Catalyst Sale Podcast. Whether you are a sales professional, not in sales, but interested in helping people solve problems, or you're a founder, CEO who's looking to grow your business, you'll find practical tools, stories, and experience you can apply to your role. This is Mike Simmons. I'm the founder of Catalyst Sale. I'm really excited to have Paul Klein on the podcast today. Paul is a podcaster, consultant. He works with executives who are ready to make the transition from W-2 to K-1. Paul, thanks for joining me today.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. Glad to be here. It's an honor.
I wish you were here when we made the transition from W-2 to K-1.
Yeah, that would have been great. You got a great thing going. I love it.
Working on it. Thank you. So what's that transition look like? Like, let's say somebody says, I'm just ready to do, maybe it's, Paul, I want to do what you do, or I want to share my expertise with the market. I want to get out of the daily grind. What's usually the catalyst that prompts them to reach out to you?
Yeah, it's like the old adage of, I don't know, my friend Dan Miller, author of 48 Days, he tells a story about a guy that has a dog on the front porch and he keeps yelping and crying. And his friend says, what's wrong with your dog? He's always sitting on a nail. And he's like, well, why doesn't he move? And he's all, well, I guess it doesn't hurt bad enough. And at some point, the pain of being where you're at or being unhappy, and that's where I was in 2009 in the peak of the recession, 18-year career, 6-figure, full benefits, top of the world. I'm like, man, I can't do this anymore. I was just unhappy. It just wasn't for me. And so I think you reach that point to where you realize there's more out there than just the 9-to-5 grind and working for someone else. And once you open up that world and discover the value and the opportunities that are out there in what we call this knowledge economy, it's just a wonderful thing. And you can double, triple, quadruple your income. And more importantly than the income is the freedom. Working from home, spend time with the kids, travel, and having an internet-based business that you can work from anywhere in the world is just, that's what it's all about these days. That's where it's at.
So are there any similarities between this and an 80s hairband?
Well, yeah, I guess I've always been an entrepreneur. Yes, you found something out about me. I did play in an 80s hairband and had long hair. And I guess that's that entrepreneurial spirit, man. I wanted to be like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses and Van Halen and all that, but that career didn't work out. And so I became an entrepreneur, which I guess I was back then.
That's a great rotation to have. So what'd you play?
I played guitar. Your listeners can't see it, but I got my Les Paul sitting back there with my little Marshall. And when I get tired of banging on sales pages and emails and doing my consulting work, I go crank the amp up onto about 9 and play a little AC/DC every now and then.
So when it comes to pricing, should we just riff away the way you riff on the Les Paul, or should we put a little bit more thought behind it?
Either way, I can tell you this, though. Most people that want to go out on their own or have that expertise like you did when you jumped, they undervalue their services. They undervalue their expertise, because what's common to us or common to you as the expert or the expert practitioner in your craft seems common. Therefore, we don't value it as much. And so I really like to encourage and help people to overcome and recognize that it's the value to the customer that's the important thing. It's not your value. And it's like what Alan Weiss says, the first sale is to yourself. If you don't value your services and your pricing, when you try to go out in the market, your lack of a value will project and you won't command those rates that you really deserve.
So what's that process look like when you go through the process of trying to figure out what value do I deliver to the marketplace?
Well, it depends on your vertical and, wherever, and there's industry variables. You obviously can't be in the coffee business and charge $100,000 for a consultation to a mom and pop shop downtown. So, every vertical has a different tack to it. But what you can do is recognize that there is absolute value in what you do. And the quicker you can recognize what that value is that you're providing the client in terms of cost savings, revenue gains, whatever the deliverable that you're doing, especially in what we call these professional services, the consulting, this realm it's just the wild, wild west. And you really got to look at it. And what we say is you price the client, not your service, because you really got to get into that, what I call customized service business with these clients and really hone in on what they need. You can't serve every client in every vertical. And so now maybe you look at a productized service. Maybe you can serve a vertical and all they can afford is a $49 ebook. Well, serve that market with that, but don't expect to attract a $15,000 consulting fee in that market if it can't support it.
Yeah. So for those who might be out there right now listening, saying, I've been doing this, I've been on this services treadmill where I just can continue to provide the same services over and over again inside an organization, and they might be uniquely different. Some of the vocabulary might change around. How do they start to think about productizing those services?
Well, the trick to productizing services, period, is you want to look. You're really looking for a one-to-many relationship. So you're looking at evergreen products, ebooks, books, online courses, things that you can create once. It takes a lot of time to create it once, and then it can be repetitive over and over. These can also be in the professional services. Say you're you could have web design packages or copywriting packages. These can also be service packages as well, but they're more productized, templated, and you're looking for one-to-many relationships, or it's very scalable. You spend a lot of time on the front end, and once it's done, hey, now we can plug you into this particular product size service or this other one, whichever one fits to you. And that's the beautiful thing about productized services. It takes a lot of time up front, but then you can just put it on autopilot or manage it it doesn't take a lot of management to maintain.
Yeah. And as you're describing that, what I'm thinking about is, it seems like, at least a thought that's resonating for me, is making it really easy for customers to know how to do business with you.
Yeah, that's a big thing. I also advocate with my podcast and the whole platform is keep it simple. I advocate for a one-page proposal, and don't complicate it with, because when you go through an RFP process, you've probably been through this before, Mike. You go through an RFP process, you get 10 proposals in from 10 different companies. They're 2 inches thick with pictures of their founder and all this other. What do? We look at the last page at the pricing sheet.
Sure.
So bypass all that. And I say, use a one-page proposal and always use 3 options. I know we might riff on this in a minute with discounts. And one of the ways you can get rid of or combat having discounting or dealing with price conscientious shoppers is provide 3 options, because now you're giving the prospect or the potential client 3 different options to engage with you at 3 different price points. And that will help combat discounting, because they can pick the low price option if they want. And then secondly, it keeps it super simple. Bullet points. If I can't fit it on one page, I don't do it. And I've had $100,000 contracts developed this way just by using a little one page all the way down to $1,500 contracts. It just works because it keeps it super simple for the prospect, and you stand out because they see this one-page proposal. They can pick the option, just like going to the car wash. What is there? A premium, a standard, and a basic. Starbucks, you got a venti, a latte, or whatever it is. You got 3 options. It just makes it super simple for your client. And
is there something mentally that we go through that makes that kind of idea resonate for us? And is there?
Yeah. It's all based in behavioral economics. There's some great books out there. Alan Weiss was probably the pioneer on it. He's got a couple different books, $1 Million Consulting. One of my favorite, who's been on my podcast, is Blair Enns. Brilliant. He has a book called Pricing Creativity that gets into this quite a bit. And then Ron Baker is another one, in implementing value-based pricing. And all these principles are based in behavioral economics. And what you do when you simplify the service options, number one is if you give a client only one price, you're basically giving them an ultimatum. Hey, take it or leave it. And we don't like that. Psychologically, we don't like that. The other thing it does when you only give them one price is now they're going to go compare your price to your competitor. But what you do when you give them 3 prices is that you give them, it's psychologically, now it's a value equation in the client's mind or the prospect's mind. And they go from not if I'm going to work with Mike, but how I'm going to work with Mike. And they compare your pricing to Mike's proposal, not your competitors. So they're more likely to engage with you because now they control the value equation. And then conversely, you control the comparisons by providing the options. And then it allows the client to select the option that best fits for them, that provides the most value and makes sense for them without just giving them an ultimatum of one price.
Yeah. And for those of you who've listened to the podcast for a while, you know that we have a pretty straightforward, simple sales process. 8 steps to it. And I know 8 steps makes it sound really complicated, but they're literally yes, no gates that you can go through. And you can go back and listen to previous episodes to go through that. But in this piece where you're delivering a proposal, I think one of the things you've got to remember is if you follow that process or you follow a sales process and you get to a point where you're going to deliver a proposal, the customer should already be invested in wanting that relationship to move forward. So help them be an advocate on your behalf, help them continue to champion this and not give them, what sometimes I fall into the trap of, because I design everything so perfectly, I want to give them one price. I end up giving them an ultimatum. I've never really thought about the single price as an ultimatum.
Yeah. It makes them feel less empowered and more likely again to go look at your competitors. Even if you'll find an uptick in your engagements with your clients if you at least even provide them 2 options.
Yep.
2 options are always better than 1. 3 is better than 2. Never go more than 4. But 3 is really the sweet spot. It's called it's based in what's called Goldilocks pricing. And the story of Goldilocks, right? The porridge is a little too hot, a little too cold. Oh, this one's just right. And inevitably we land in that middle tier usually. And in Goldilocks pricing, it's the same thing. You use a high anchor, you have your premium service that really is the ultimate super fast delivery, whatever it is, deluxe version, the Cadillac version. And then you have your low option, which is your economy version. And then that mid option, usually what I try to do on that mid option, if I know the client's budget, I'll usually aim my middle option, my low option around their budget, and then I'll work up from there. So I'll use if I know their budget's say $15,000, that's going to be probably my low option. Sometimes I'll point it at the middle option if it's depending on the deliverables and what I'm working. But that's what you can do. You'll really see an uptick in your engagements just using that methodology in itself.
Yeah. And I mean, historically, when I've done proposals, usually the coaching I would usually give is around providing 2 options. And the primary reason for providing 2 options, even though I said earlier, I'll give instances where I'll provide 1. And sometimes I will do that. Like, it depends on how much work we've done up until that point. But when it comes to the 2 options, what I'm really trying to do is I'm trying to validate an understanding of the value that they're putting toward individual components that are in the discussion. And this is usually before that final decision has been made, so that when we get into that discounting piece, and now that both of us have said discounting, I'm going to have to mark this thing as explicit because that is a 4-letter word in my it's
hourly, that and hourly billing. Yeah. Those 2 things are bad words in our world.
Well, I'm going to get back to the hourly billing because it's amazing how many organizations want to pull you right back into the hourly billing thing. And I know you talked about this with Jody on his podcast, and we'll put a link to it. If you've not listened to that, Paul was on Jody Mayberry's podcast recently, and they had a great discussion around pricing. But when giving these 2 options and looking at and using that as a way to kind of assess or get an understanding of what the customer values and where they're putting a higher level of value on something that maybe is a little bit easier for you to trade. It might not be as important to you, but they're putting a much higher value on it. Is that another reason to provide multiple options here, or am I overcomplicating things?
No, you're right on line because, at the end of the day, it's the value to the client. And sometimes you'll miss that. You'll undervalue something that they really value. And maybe you have that in a lower option. And all you've got to do is, I don't advocate for really moving stuff around once you've proposed, but the reality is I've done that. And I know some of the people I work with do that. But sometimes that process will reveal some other tangibles that you didn't think were important, but then you didn't realize they were really valuable to the client. And this is, again, goes back, look at the airlines. What's the product on an airline? Flying from New York to LA. It's to get from New York to LA. But what do we have? We have first class, we have comfort, and we have economy. Depending on when you buy the ticket, you'll pay a different price, where you sit, whether you get a meal or not. So in all these different levels of price for a ticket from New York to LA, everybody pays a difference. It's called price discrimination, and it's actually a good thing. And it dovetails back into what you're saying. And someone may only value, hey, I just need to get to New York. I'll sit in C49 in the middle seat for $49. But someone else will say, no, I want wine and a salad and watch some TV on the way. So I'll pay $1,400 to get to the same place.
Need that leg room. Need the leg room.
Exactly.
So when you were going through that, I had a scenario here not that long ago, but it was a situation where I put together a proposal for an organization. It was a 3-month proposal, and it was very clear what the deliverables were going to be over the 3-month term. And one of the pieces of feedback that they gave, it was more of an objection that came out, or even just a general question. They said, could we do it? Time's really important. Could we do it in 2 months? Could we do everything in 2 months? And I said, sure, we can make it work where we can get that done in 2 months. And the response was, how does that change the pricing? And it wasn't even how does it change the pricing, expecting it to be a little bit more because now we were combining things in a shorter period of time. It was more like, okay, so how are you going to reduce the pricing because we're only keeping it? And so my first response was, it doesn't change the pricing. We're still delivering the same thing. She said, well, you're doing it in a tighter time period. I said, but we're delivering the same results. We're delivering the same package. And I said, quite frankly, because it will force me to not do other things, I should increase it. But I feel confident, given what I know about the organization, that we can do this in that period. Is that the right way to handle that kind of objection?
For the most part, there's a little tip I can give you. The first thing is that particular client in that case obviously values time. Instead of equating the value of the engagement with you in terms of the value that you're providing, they automatically associate it with time. So that's a kind of a red flag. And my counter to her or he would have been, well, if you value time, we will take 6 months to do this project and we'll work 10 hours a day and bill you for that. Or we'll take 360 days. Because if you only value time and you want more time, because that's value. And what it does is it reveals the hypocrisy of what they're saying. And then, no, we want the result. And it refocuses that conversation back on the result, which is the quicker you can get back to that, the better it will be. And you essentially did the same thing, but I use that line a lot. I say, well, if you only value time, we'll spend 12 hours a day on it with 10 staff, and we'll pump it up to $100,000 instead of 50. And oh, no, we don't want to do that. Well, then it's because you don't value time. You value the results.
You value the results. So why do we fall into the trap? I say we, not only the consultant who maybe is responding and buys into the idea of, okay, let's put together an hourly rate. Why do we fall into the trap from a consulting perspective? And why do customers want to see things in the context of an hourly rate? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, it's been ingrained in part of our society since the Industrial Revolution. The billable hour was invented early in that time, and I think it really became prevalent in the 50s by the legal profession. And since then, the factories, and the labor, laws that came in, everything. And so it's been ingrained in society and in our psyche for the last 200 years easily, and more prevalently in the last 100 years. And then what's also happened is it's easy to understand. Oh, okay, you show up, I pay you $25 an hour. At the end of the day, you get off, you get a paycheck every 2 weeks. It's easy to understand. And and with value, it's very hard. It's very subjective, and it's valuable to you and someone else, and that's why it's harder for people to understand what they're getting and also compare things. So because of that difficulty, it just kind of keeps driving consultants and clients to the hourly billing. Which when people ask me what my billable hour is, I tell them I don't have one. I totally shift the discussion. I don't bill by the hour. It's like discounting. It's a bad word.
Awesome. So on the piece of value is subjective, if value is subjective, how can that help us or hurt us in a negotiation?
How can it help you or hurt us? Well, it more can help you in terms of, because at the end of the day, people buy outcomes, not time. Yep. And you want to, if you're an ethical consultant business person like you are and I am, and most of the listeners here probably are, you want to serve and serve well. And at the end of the day, you don't want someone who paid a lot of money and didn't feel like they got a good job. I'm sure you're like me, Mike. If you had a $35,000 contract, and they were not happy and they didn't feel like they got the same value, you probably refund it or do something to make it right. Right. We've got a reputation and everything. So I think in terms of value, you've got to, quicker you can identify that value and make that win-win for the client and yourself and make that exchange of money and value, the better off we are. The second thing is if they don't value it, then you want to identify quickly that they're not your ideal client. You're not the right person for them, and then point them ethically to another consultant or another firm or somebody that can serve them better. And if they're a price shopper or they only are buying for price, then they're probably not my kind of client anyway, because they only value price. And it's like, do you shop at Walmart or do you shop at Neiman Marcus? It's like, it's two different worlds.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people who would love to drive around in a Porsche, but pay a Honda Civic price.
Yeah. And you can't have it that way. It just doesn't work that way.
You can't have it that way. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. Well, so let's get back into a discussion here around kind of your expertise around pricing. What are some of the common misperceptions around price when someone like me decides to make this transition where I want to go from W2 to K1? Like I want to go W2 to K1. And you talked a little bit about I undervalue the services because I think this just kind of comes easy to me. So there's not a significant amount of value. But beyond that one that you'd hit on, what are some other common misperceptions or errors that folks like me make when they make this transition when it comes to pricing?
Yeah, I think the first thing that they do is they equate it to time, and they don't value their expertise, or they have a perception of the services they are providing in comparison to their competitors. So let's say you're an expert in a particular vertical and your competitors are charging $1,500 for a service. So typically we will come out and start charging just under that or near that because that's what your competitors are doing. But the reality is if Apple had done that or Starbucks had done that, Starbucks would be still selling coffee for 25 cents. Apple would still be selling computers for $499. But no, they didn't do that. They looked at the value and the positioning of their brand, and you have to do that too. And then also, that's why we say pricing is positioning. Your pricing positions you and the types of clients you want to attract. And so what you can do is get farther so you can away from hourly or even your competitors and immediately focus on your ideal client and what is the value that you are bringing to them. If you have let's say a $12,000 solution typically, but now you start working with companies that are, generating multi-million dollars, and that $12,000 can now save them, $250,000, then your fee should be closer to that $250,000 because it's all based on what we call value-based pricing. In Ron Baker's book, Implementing Value-Based Pricing, that's kind of it in a nutshell. It's like, don't price your services based on what you think they're worth or, the $1,500 or $12,000. Look at the value that you're saving. People will pay all day. People will pay 20 cents for every dollar they make. And it's the same thing in the 100, I'll pay, $200,000 to make $1 million all day.
Yeah. Right.
So why charge them 12,000 if that's what your competitors are charging? Charge what the value is closer to what you're serving your clients with.
Yeah, one of the questions I like to ask there is, and it gets just to reinforce this same point that you're making is, what's the actual impact we're going to make on the business? Are we solving $1 million problem or are we solving a $10,000 problem?
Exactly.
If we're solving a $10,000 problem, let's not solve it with a $100,000 solution.
Right. If
we're solving $1 million problem, we might be okay solving that with a $100,000 solution. We don't need to solve it with a $10,000 solution.
Exactly.
This is where that perception, and I had a old psychology professor back when I was at ASU, Greg Nider, he would continue to reinforce that perception is reality. Perception is reality. Perception is reality. Mm-hmm. So think about it. If you can empathize with your customer and work through understanding what their perception is of the impact you're going to make on the organization, then you can receive fair compensation for the value that you're delivering inside that organization.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the key in it, and some people get caught up on, it's, I only get paid, $15,000 for this set of deliverables I do. So the thought of charging $100,000 for the same thing, they feel like, oh, well, I'm ripping them off or it's dishonest. And it's like, no, it's not dishonest, because what you've spent years and years advancing your expertise, classes, they're paying you for the 20,000 hours and hours, education, degrees, everything that got you to that point to be able to solve that particular problem. And so that's why it goes back to what I say, price the client, not your service, and then look at the value. And, Blair Enns talks about in pricing creativity, it's the old Nike and Pepsi logo story. I don't know if you heard about that, but in 1972, Nike had just getting ready to release their first set of, and I forget the guy's name, the Nike guy, but he hired a student at University of Oregon to design the Nike swoosh for I think it was in today's dollars, it'd be $150. In 2008, Pepsi went through a rebrand for their logo, and they had just done it with their Tropicana brand, and it bombed. They rebranded it. It bombed the brand. They had to pull the new branding off and repackage everything, redo all their machines and everything. It cost them millions of dollars. So with the Pepsi brand, they said, hey, we got to get this right. So in 2008, they hired a design firm. It was $1 million to design a logo. So if you look at the Pepsi logo in 2008 and the Nike logo in 1972, can you say one was $1 million worth or $999,900 and whatever, $950 more? No. the value to Pepsi in 2008 and everything that was related to it was much higher stake because of the stakes involved. And that's the same thing in your expertise, is looking at the value and the proposition for that particular client that's in front of you at that moment.
And I think a key takeaway here is understanding the stakes from the customer perspective. So Pepsi in this instance just went through that feeling of, oh crap, this Tropicana thing didn't work out for us, and it cost us so much money to go through and replace it. So their perception of the value of getting that right is significantly different than when I want to redo the Catalyst Sale logo. Because
it's what we call circumstances.
Circumstances. Awesome.
Yeah, circumstances dictate, can play into that value and everything. But again, it's all customer centric.
So this is where research really helps, like going through and asking the questions and gathering the information and making sure you don't make assumptions about what you think is important to the customer, because that just happened to be the thing that was important to the customer the last time you worked with them. So Paul, you've got your, I'm forgetting the term, it's the product ladder. Is that right?
Yeah. I talk about every brand should have a product ladder and a way to onboard a client, and it starts off with either a free or low tier products, and then works all the way up to your high end or your high anchor product. And you can have 1, 2, 3, or 1,000. Just the idea is having a product ladder. So just like look at Apple, you buy you bought the iPod for $200, then you bought the iPhone, then you bought the iPad, then you bought the iMac, so it just, now what's the new one? It's like a $5,000 monitor or something like that.
Yeah, with I think $1,000 monitor stand.
Yeah, and that's you want to riff on that for a second? There's a lesson there. So for everybody that's listening didn't see, Apple, as you said, Mike, just launched a brand new $5,000 monitor for the MacBook Pro, and then for an additional $1,000 you get the stand. They missed out on a pricing opportunity there. They should have price the monitor at $6,000, and then if you don't want the stand, it's $5,000. It would have positioned. You see what I'm saying?
What's the difference?
Well, it's not. It's how they. Everybody's pissed. I'm sorry, I don't want to cuss. Everybody's griping and complaining about the $1,000 stand. But had they reversed that and said it was a $6,000 monitor, but if you don't need the stand, it's only $5,000. It would have positioned them for no complaints. It would have changed the value equation. And it's the same thing in our professional services. When you have something, price it such, and then if you want to back it out, don't do it as an add-on. Do it, hey, my fee is this, and then if you don't use this, then it's that.
Yep.
But it's just reversing it. It's better for the customer. I think here I am. I'm just a peon here compared to a billion-dollar company like Apple, but I think they muffed that one, in my opinion.
Do you think they did it intentionally, just for the kind of the attention? Like, could that be part of their strategy?
I like to think that that's a big enough company that they put enough thought and had strategists to do that, but it doesn't make sense to me. I mean, it always works better the other way around. They're getting some bad press from it, so I don't know. And they got us talking about it, so maybe that was part of the plan.
Maybe that was part of the plan. They wanted to see if the Catalyst Sale podcast would talk about the $1,000 monitor, and there you go.
It worked.
You guys won. It worked. So let's talk about how you build. And I know we'll share some links with folks so that they can go to your website and they can do the download and go through the process. But let's give them just kind of a little bit of insight into what that process is in creating a product ladder and what you should be thinking about as you build out the ladder.
Yeah. Again, I advocate having an onboarding mechanism or an on-ramping process to all your products. And I follow the modern day sales funnel, which, having a freebie or some free resources available on your page, to get the whole idea is to get them on your email list. So free PDF, free video course, free ebook or something around your niche or your expertise. Then the next tier up would be you start getting into your productized services. Now you have maybe a paid ebook, a paid video course or something like that, or some kind of other resource. And then as you move up this product ladder, the price goes up. So, that might be the free, and then you might have a $50 to $150 product. Then you get into maybe a $500 to a $2,500 product. And then whatever your price, wherever you are in your vertical, you get up to your high end, which, could be a $20,000 product or like a, one-on-one coaching package, or if you have another set of deliverables, like your eight-part process that you do for B2Bs, maybe you're in the $100,000 range, whatever that is. But the idea is to have that ladder so that they can onboard you, because all this, even B2B, everything is all about relationships. And so when you have a footprint out there, digital footprint out there, web page and everything, and you have those different products that people can engage in you, they usually, it's just like we talk about it. It's a ladder. They nibble on the freebie. They like what they see. Then they buy the next one. And then they eventually become a full-on client for you. And it allows them to walk up that ladder and engage with your brand.
And it just brings me back to remember, like when Jen and I started dating, we didn't get married right away. Like there was some courtship that had happened, and different iterative processes. And I'm sure she'd love, if she was listening to this, hearing me talk about our marriage or our courtship as an iterative process. But that's what it is. I mean, each of these things kind of build on each other. Why do we overcomplicate this stuff when we start thinking about it in the context of our business?
I think it's the old saying, you can't see the label on the bottle from inside. What's that? Have you heard that one before? You're inside the bottle, so you can't see the outside label because you're caught in the weeds. It's the old, are you familiar with Donald Miller's story brand framework?
Extremely. And we had Donald and JJ both on the podcast at different times. And really good stuff. Yep.
Yeah. And it's the same idea, and I like to say that the pricing thing that I'm doing is like, it's that caveman grunt thing that they talk about in your messaging is the same thing in your pricing, keeping it simple. But I think that's the problem with all of it, is that we overcomplicate it. And we're so used to the used cars men, sell. We got to close, we got to get the deals, and that's just not the way it works. And just like StoryBrand, just like you did with your wife, the freebie is holding hands,
Yep.
And then you go out on a date, it was maybe a paid product. And then, then maybe you go on a weekend trip, maybe that's your higher end coaching package. And then now they decide to get married with you and they buy the $100,000, package, or the $20,000 package, whatever it is. So it's all about relationships. I mean, it's no different than the old brick and mortar days than it is on the internet. Human nature is human nature, and we all want to buy from who we know, like, and trust.
Yeah. And as you go through that, just think what Paul just did there. And he basically described how the courtship between Jen and I before we got married. And it's like you can design these experiences on behalf of your customer based on the expertise you have and your awareness of what happens in the marketplace. So leverage that expertise to support building out that design. And then when you start to identify patterns that don't align with what you expect, then revisit that design. You don't have to, it's not all shaped in stone or etched in stone. This is an iterative process.
Yeah, absolutely. I went out 10 years ago. One of the first things I did is I just created an ebook, and I just curated a bunch of stuff on the internet that people could have gotten. But what I did is I just wrapped a nice bow around it, put it for sale on my webpage for $29. And in the first year, just that e-product generated about $29,000 for me. It wasn't even my content. It was someone else's content. But you learn from that and you iterate, like you said, Mike, and don't be afraid to put your best stuff out there, your best content. None of us are that important or that big, but the more people can, learn about you and learn about your expertise. Even when I know somebody, a guru or a mentor, even though I know all their stuff through their podcast and their freebies, I still want to engage with them, or I'll still hire them. And it's so true in your knowledge-based business, consulting business. You've got to demonstrate that expertise before people will pay you money for it.
Awesome. Paul, this has been an awesome conversation. I know you touched on this in the podcast with Jody, and like I said, we'll link to it. But can you, for those who are out there who are still kind of trying to figure out, well, what's the difference between price and value? How would you distinguish between the two?
Yeah, value is the maximum amount that a consumer will pay for an item or a service. So, that's it in a nutshell. It doesn't matter how much you value it or what you price it at. If the market or the person buying it doesn't value it, then it's just a moot point. And the second thing, part of that is it's all about creating that win-win, at even exchange. They've got to be willing to get rid of their hard-earned money for the product or service that you're providing, and then in their eyes, whatever that is, it has to be an equal value or a return. I think it was on your podcast. I think you were talking about pricing, about how some people go to Disneyland Was it your podcast? And you know, hey, they're going to get pictures with the kids. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a $150 ticket. It's the experience. And so they're willing to give up that $150 for the experience because their kids are only going to be 10 once, right?
Yep.
It's the same thing. So the value in their world for that particular person is, the value to them is greater than what it is to give up the $1,500 for the Disneyland trip or whatever. And it's the same thing in your professional services. The value's got to be greater than what they're willing to pay for it.
Yeah. And we're going through one of those planning of that kind of a family trip right now. And each time we do it, there's more time that goes into planning that kind of a trip where we're trying to coordinate all other members of the family so that the experience is much more than just being in Orlando or being on a cruise ship or being wherever it is. It's this whole of the experience. And if you find people who care about that stuff, then they might pay a premium for it. If people don't care about it and they just want to put it in set it or forget it mode, then there's not that same value. And it's through those questions you ask that you should be able to reveal that about your customer. Not all customers are created equally. Not all services that you provide are created equally. If it fits, good, go forward. If it doesn't fit, don't try to force it because it's going to cost you significantly more in the end in things like scope creep, in frustration, you name it. It will cost you.
Yeah, that's so important that, don't just make a sale for the sake of making a sale. Always make sure they're a good fit for you. And you're creating that win-win. You're not just there to get a big 6-figure contract. You're there to serve a purpose and serve a value so that when you leave that engagement, someone calls them and says, hey, oh yeah, man, we had a few issues, but man, Paul took care of it. Mike was on it and it was the best experience. We'd use them again. And that's what you want because word of mouth is more powerful than Facebook ads and all this stuff.
Awesome. So Paul, when people want to find out more about what you're doing, where you are, how they connect with you, where would you like to send them?
Yeah, I'd love for them to come over to paulklein.net is my webpage. And on that page, you can find my podcast, the Pricing is Positioning podcast. I put it out every week, every Thursday. And I've also got a freebie on there that Mike and I spoke about, the product pricing roadmap, which has the product ladder in it. It's a fillable PDF that you can use to brainstorm your products and services. And I also have in there a 2 options, 3 options, and 4 options sheet. So when you break down each one of your products or services, you can go through and list the benefits. I use that all the time when I'm making proposals and stuff. So paulklein.net, Pricing is Positioning podcast on iTunes, Alexa, iHeartRadio, Spotify, all that good stuff. Love for you to connect there and reach out to me if you find this stuff interesting.
Awesome. And we'll include links in the show notes. Paul, thanks for joining the podcast. That was an awesome discussion. We'll include all of the links in the show notes. If you know someone who'd benefit from hearing this discussion, please share it with them and let us know via Twitter or LinkedIn. I'd like to hear how you're applying the lessons learned, concepts discussed in your role today. Sales is a thinking process. How are you thinking differently about yours?